Good morning. It's wonderful to be together on this first Sunday in August. And most of us will remember that August in the Unity tradition is dedicated to one of the 12 powers, and that power is the faculty or spiritual gift of will. So I just invite you to take in these words from the readings that have inspired me this week. The first one is taken from Along the Path to Enlightenment by Dr. David Hawkins, and it reads, "The ego relies on force. The spirit influences by power. Awareness knows that it is not what you do, but who you are and what you have become that counts in the long run." Who you are, what you have become counts in the long run. So we are so blessed to be together in this becomingness that we join together to trust. And I have a second reading that comes from Dr. Bernie Siegel, who some of you will recognize as a retired pediatric surgeon who, like many men of science, it has been my experience, do become illumined by the spirit within them. And he writes, and I'm going to read it. "I walked through hospitals, corridors, and I went into every room, continually asking people who had things I was afraid of, why do you want to live? How do you manage? Each time, what impressed me was that their lists did not contain pages of philosophical discussions about the meaning of life. Each time I asked each person, I was struck by the simplicity of what they told me. I painted a picture," someone said, "with only my fingers because a brush had to be tied to her hand. I looked out the window, and what a beautiful day," another said. Another said, "The nurse rubbed my back today. My family called. They're coming to see me." The list just went on and on with simple daily events, and I began to accept that this is really what life is about. Those of us on the spiritual path have made it part of our goal, I believe, to embrace what we decide that life is really about for each one of us. The title of my talk this morning zeroes in on a very specific application of the faculty of will. Will as a gift. Will is represented in Unity by the Apostle Matthew. My particular understanding of how this may have come about is that Matthew was very well off in the means that the world values. And so when he willed through the power of spirit in him to follow the teachings of the master, it is arguable that he gave up more perhaps than any of the other apostles. Unity places this faculty of will at the very front of the brain. And of course, part of this is because the will is the executive power in mind, and willingness, just a little willingness as the prerequisite to shifting our perception, is an assignment that occurs in consciousness moment by moment, sometimes split second by split second. The little willingness to shift how we are seeing something sounds easier than done. It needs to be a conscious decision that we activate our power of will to yield, to give in, and to allow our humanity to perceive something in a different way than it is appearing. Some of you know that a shift in perception is defined as a miracle. What we seek, we will find. I'm going to be using my personal experiences this week to demonstrate the importance of shifting our perception through presenting ourselves very willing to see anybody, any circumstance, and anything that is in front of us in a different way. Willing to ask for another way than the first way that might come up. I don't know about you, but I notice that so often the first perception that comes to me is one of criticism, judgment, or condemnation. The only way to eradicate these permanently, as is true for anything else in consciousness that we no longer wish to have there, is through continuous practice. In our unity tradition, we emphasize that the faculty of will needs to be closely aligned with understanding. And over the century and a half of our tradition, we often talk about what happens when this will, this free will, this ability to choose, is activated without any understanding. Certainly, we can all think of times when activating only our will, the possibility then exists for bossiness, rigidity, a domineering manner. I like the next one, persecution of self or others. Did you ever think about the inner critic that shows up for some of us as the faculty of will gone awry? That's a new one for me. And so I sought to apply it this week. Anytime self-recrimination, self-judgment, self-persecution came up, I invoked the power of understanding, because will without understanding can become dictatorial in ways that are only destructive. Specifically, I would like to give us right away this morning a practical way to apply this little bit of willingness that's required. As we notice, and that's really the first step, is to notice the first response. Often it's a reaction, right? And so let's differentiate, first of all, between responsivity and reactivity. Responsivity requires a little willingness. Reactivity is the will out of control. When someone is in our presence, and this week I was so grateful for 5 different experiences that I sat with and recognized the difference between how I might have reacted if I were not immersing myself in this practice of a little willingness to see it a little differently. And so I applied these 3 steps. And not surprisingly, the first one, regardless of what the triggers may have looked like calling to my reactivity, the first step was gratitude. And so I would stop as I'd catch myself on the brink of a judgment or a criticism or a condemnation and say simply, thank you. Thank you for what? Thank you for the awareness. Thank you for this circumstance or person. Thank you that I am willing. I'm presenting myself even just a little bit willing to see this another way. So the second step is, hello, teacher. How many teachers did you encounter this week? Like I said, I'm sure there were more than 5, but I'd like to share with you the 5 that came across my path that I applied this formula to. Thank you for coming. Oh, I see you're here. Thank you. Hello, teacher. And finally, with the willingness, my willpower activated to wonder and to know, oh, this is for me. This is for me. And what is it for? So before I go into these detailed experiences where I was able to say, thank you, first of all, and notice what that gratitude does. As a programming in our consciousness to go immediately to gratitude, it stops me. It stops me from that knee-jerk reaction into, oh, I think I know what's coming here, which is judgment. When we think we know, we really are not knowing at all. And so this is another guidepost that's been central to my life, that perception is always of the ego, knowledge is of spirit. I cannot access the knowledge of spirit. The consciousness cannot be illumined while I am clinging to the perceptions that my ego presents almost always first and foremost. So we go into these specific experiences, and I invite you to think about the teachers that crossed your path this week and how successful we can be with these 3 steps. Thank you. Hello, teacher. And what is this for? The first was a really shocking one, and I think sometimes this is part of why it's important to go into our day with our consciousness tilled through the power of will, determining that what we are going to seek is to be love. I had a technician come to fix the problems that I was having with my internet and my phone. And from the moment this wonderful young man first stepped into my front foyer, something I saw in his energy and a judgment came up, and I thought, oh, he's looking like he's not having a good day. And then I stopped and I said, you can't know that. Show yourself willing to see this another way. And so I decided to just say thank you for being here. What is this for? And he proceeded to tell me what he was going to be doing. And I was aware that I became fearful when he said drilling. He said, and then I'm going to do this drilling. And so I let him finish, but I was already reactive in my questioning because I said, what are you going to drill? Are you going to drill on the outside on the bricks, or are you going to drill on in the baseboard? Like, I don't know what you mean. And he said, look, lady, I do this for a living every day. And I went, whoa. Thank you. I told myself, thank you. Hello, teacher. What is this for? So clearly what it was for in that moment was for me to practice this willingness to see it another way. And so I said to him, go ahead. I'm sure you know what you're doing, and I'm just glad you're here. So then he said, well, I need you to tell me where you want this. And I said, not trying to be difficult. I said, well, I don't really know. I said, it's up to you. And he said, no, it isn't. It's up to you. And then I said, oh, well, I don't know. You can see where my computer is, because he had by that time stepped into this room. And then he said in his innocence, no, I hadn't even noticed your computer there. And so this is how the practice with this particular gentleman went back and forth. I was really grateful that I had the presence of mind to realize that I did care where this contraption was going to go. And so the more that I could say, thank you for his being here. Hello, you're my teacher. What is it for? It's helping me to not judge this individual who really is here for me. I was able to sneak it off into a corner, and he was happy with that. Now, what happened as I continued to bless him is that I went about my work, but I noticed that he seemed to be here a very long time, because he arrived here around 12:30, and at 2:45, when I next looked at the clock, I saw his truck was still out front. So when he rang the doorbell and I let him in, he apologized. He said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." He said, "You wouldn't believe it." And he went into technical language about twisted wires and a part that he needed. And he said, "I'm never here this long." And I just said to him, "Thank you for coming. I'm glad that you're here. And I'm so grateful that things were fixed." And so it was interesting to me that the attack mode that I sensed in him had completely shifted. And of course, that is because my perception of how I was seeing him had been very deliberately shifted. And this happened for me over and over this week. I was invited to dinner by some people from a little country church that I had attended. And during the dinner, one of the gentlemen asked the other 5 of us if we had seen the Barbie movie. And all 5 of us just said, no. And he said, "Well, I think I can talk you into going to see it." So of course, I noticed myself saying, okay, don't go into judgment. Open your mind, receive this gift. And so I said to myself, "Thank you. Hello, teacher. What is this for?" And so he said that his particular philosophy of life, of which the 6 of them belong to, was actually represented subliminally in the Barbie movie. And so we all just listened to him, and I noticed that there was no judgment on my part. Then he said, "The director is part of our philosophy." And so there is in the movie, and I could feel judgment coming up in me, because I thought, oh my goodness, this feels like separation. You know, we have it right. Everybody else has it wrong. And I'm like, no. Back to gratitude. Thank you. Hello, teacher. What is this for? And so he proceeded to give us what was his perception or his interpretation or his opinion. And I was able to stay out of judgment. And he said that that particular movie has subliminal messaging that is seeking to dismantle a patriarchal society. And I could feel myself having absolutely no attachment, judgment, or criticism. Then he went around and asked each of us if we were going to see the movie now. And I forget what the others said, but I just said, I don't know. And I think that staying in my I don't know mind is a wonderful function of being just a little bit willing to notice my filter, notice where judgment wants to go, and instead saying, thank you. Hello, teacher. What is this for? I had a wonderful one this morning, early morning. One of the things I love about being in the city is that at 7 o'clock I can walk not too far to get my decaf coffee if I don't feel like my very strong one that my coffee maker makes. And I had taken a toonie out of my wallet, stuck it in my rain slicker. And then I thought, just throw some more change in there. So when I went up to the counter, I had originally ordered a medium. And then I said to the lady, do you know what? I don't know how much a large is, but can you give me a large? So she said, oh, it's $2.15. And so I took the toonie and the 15 cents out. I didn't know that that's what it was. And I said, oh, look, I have exactly $2.15. Do you know what she said to me? She didn't even skip a beat. She said, well, God really loves you. Another time, I might have had a judgment, a criticism of her saying that to me. Instead, I was fully engaged in, thank you. Hello, teacher. What is this for? And I blessed her. The last example kind of ended up characterizing most of my week. Early in the week, a lady I have a lot of respect for who did her PhD in English in Oxford had asked me if I had read the work of this particular person, Karen Armstrong. And I said no. And she said, oh my goodness, I'm going to lend you her book. And so again, staying out of judgment, opinion, criticism, I just thought, okay, go to gratitude. Thank you. Hello, teacher. What is this for? Well, I don't mind telling you that this book became just occupying so much of my spare energy this week, because this is a woman who spent 7 years in a Catholic convent and who was fainting on and off during those 7 years, was told that she was histrionic, overly sensitive, and looking for attention. In short, her memoir is entitled The Spiral Staircase, My Climb Out of Darkness. And as I finished her 300 and some pages this week, mostly at night, I was struck by how often her writing took me to that edge of reactivity, judgment, criticism, condemnation. So in the case of Dr. Innard recommending this spiral staircase to me, I noticed that at first I was not presenting a little willingness. I was not easily shifting my perception. In fact, some of my judgments that came up were, oh, wow, just what I need, another book to read. And this book has been transformational in my unity thinking about all of the faith religions of the world, because her own evolution through being a devout Catholic to being a person who wanted no part of God, and then to being a person who was able to transcend all religious practices to understand that a religious experience only happens within, was a powerful one. I'm just going to read a short passage from her experience to share with you, and just notice how easy it was for me, is what I can tell you, to immediately go into judgment. She says, it suddenly seemed shameful to me that I had grown up in such ignorance of Judaism, Islam, knowing now that certainly Judaism was the parent faith. The more I read about first century Judaism, the more intensely Jesus appeared to me. And even St. Paul, who was such a rebel, was really arguing about a new Israel. I knew that I would never again, because of this project, be able to think about Christianity as a separate religion. I would have to develop a type of triple vision. Increasingly, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam seemed to be one faith tradition which went in 3 different directions. For me, that was a powerful affirmation of what I understand our unity tradition to be about. At that dinner with my Unitarian friends, I invariably get asked, well, what is unity about? How old is it? How is it different? And it was so affirming for me to have read in Karen Armstrong's book, The Spiral Staircase, about this oneness. She's dedicated her life to promoting this oneness in the three religions. She's dedicated her academic life to understanding the historical genesis, really, of all three traditions. And I just noticed that in my suspending my judgment from the outset, in my being able to present myself just a little bit willing to shift any judgments I had about this former nun who was going to write about reacclimating herself to the world, that I could be blessed, and I was. Not very long after Karen was back into secular living, she was diagnosed with epilepsy. And again, staying out of judgment of those years and years when she was allowed to have what were small seizures. A doctor only diagnosed her with a grand mal seizure when things had intensified for her in that experience. It's interesting in terms of healing and in terms of our being the love that we have been sent to be in the world, that she was able to recognize in one of the sisters in the convent that she had gone back to visit the dis-ease of anorexia. Again, the nuns had been, I'm sure, with the best of intentions, telling her that she was simply looking for attention. And Karen had become quite emotional and shrieked at the Mother Superior, "Are you going to let her die?" And so Karen, in the many, many ways that she herself was healed through healing others, she took this fellow former colleague out of the convent to seek help for the anorexia. And so all of that brings me to our unity tradition, which most simply captured for me, this is my line when I'm out socially like I was for dinner, what is unity about? And I say it's in our name, we leave no one out. It actually is a pamphlet that I'm sure some of you have seen over the years. Unity leaves no one out. And so as we move into this month of August, more heightened in our awareness of our ability to use the faculty of our will by twinning it with the faculty of understanding, that we can become responsible, awake, and aware to how quickly we go into judgment and how it's just as easy to suspend that judgment by recognizing it's a blessing, that we are at that critical juncture of falling off the cliff and into judgment, criticism, and condemnation. And instead, we can use our faculty of will with understanding to pause and give thanks for whatever it is. Start with a thank you, then greet that person or circumstance as a teacher. Thank you. Hello, teacher. What is this for? And ultimately, we will recognize that it is always something for our edification, for our illumination, for our expansion in our knowing that at our core, we are one. Amen. It is so.